As I give this as a continuing medical education lecture, I have to disclose that nobody's paying me for anything. So I have no financial conflicts of interest here. We're going to articulate the basic tenets of the two foundational philosophical views regarding the ethical foundation of physician action. There's two of them. We're going to identify areas of agreement and disagreement between these two worldviews. And we're going to recognize the key words and ideas around which the crux of the discussion revolves and the implications for current and future medical practice. Because you have to understand, this discussion is not a medical discussion. It's a legal and philosophical discussion, and it hinges on some very important key words. So first of all, I thought I'd show you this article from the British Medical Journal, just mostly the cartoon, because that's kind of what it feels like as a physician right now. You know, people are rubbing the lamp and pulling up what is a good physician. But this is actually a 2,500-year-old philosophical question. And the question is, how should a person, a physician, act? What should they do? See, science can only answer the question, what is? It's normative ethics that answers the question, what should be? And this is a 2,500-year-old argument, predating Christianity. There's two different views. One is that happiness is a byproduct of right action for right reasons. And doing the right thing, according to virtue and reason, is the substance of well-being or health. It's called a virtue ethic perspective. Versus a contemporary of Aristotle named Aristippus, who said the goal of life is to experience the maximum amount of pleasure, and that your happiness is the totality of your hedonic moments. So happiness or pleasure is the substance of well-being. And this is utilitarian hedonism. On happiness and human potentials, I'm not a philosopher, but I can read some really well-written stuff. And on happiness and human potentials, which I reference below, is a really good simplification for us non-philosophers as to what the argument is. The Hippocratic Oath is a virtue ethic document. It assumes a reality outside of man. It's bigger than us. That's transcendence. It assumes that certain actions are good and certain actions are wrong, and that we will be held accountable for our actions. It assumes that physicians have a duty to act rightly toward their patients. And it assumes that acting rightly toward the patient results in health both for the patient and the physician. Like I said, pretty good for a pagan. This is 500 years before Christ. Even though it was written in that pagan Greek period, the Hippocratic Oath was adopted by Christian, Jewish, and Islamic medicine, compatible. It went from a minority opinion in 400 BC to the worldwide foundation of medical ethics for the past 2,000 years, until recently. The oath defines a unique doctor-patient relationship. If you talk about the doctor-patient relationship, the only reason there's a unique doctor-patient relationship is because of the Hippocratic Oath. It's characterized by the physician's vow, by everything they hold sacred, to protect their patients and not do them harm. Otherwise, without that, it's just a business deal. It is the oath which forms the basis of physician conscience. Now, if anybody knows Margaret Mead, she is not right of center. But I want to use this quote because it's very interesting what she observed. With the Greeks, the distinction was made clear. One profession was to be dedicated completely to life under all circumstances, regardless of rank, age, or intellect. The life of a slave, the life of the emperor, the life of a foreign man, the life of a defective child. This is a priceless possession we cannot afford to tarnish. For the first time in our tradition, there was a complete separation between killing and curing. Throughout the primitive world, the doctor and sorcerer tended to be the same person. He with the power to kill had the power to cure. But society is always attempting to make the physician into a killer, to kill the defective child at birth, to leave the sleeping pills beside the bed of the cancer patient. It is the duty of society to protect the physician from such requests. Well, what is this oath that we're talking about? I'm going to go through the essential elements. There's 7 of them. Remembering, of course, that the most essential element is that this is a vow that a physician takes by all he or she holds sacred. Okay? So you can't separate it from the virtue ethic assumption that there is something to which we are accountable to. But these are the essential elements. 1, to teach medicine only to those who are bound by this oath, and not to just anybody. 2, to act only for the benefit of the patient. 3, to never assist in suicide or practice euthanasia, nor to suggest it. 4, and I left out the word that's really important, similarly, to never perform an abortion. 5, to refer to physicians of sufficient expertise. Why would that be? We're all tempted to pride. And guys, there's a time when you realize my skills are not sufficient for this problem. 6, to never have sex with patients. 7, to maintain patient confidentiality. That's the oath. That's what we used to swear to. Well, why is this important? We're going to look at a different worldview and, focusing again, thinking about the oath. The virtue ethic assumption assumes that there is an ideal, an objective standard of truth and goodness to which all human beings are accountable. The utilitarian hedonist view assumes that there is no ideal. There is no objective standard of truth and goodness to which all human beings are accountable. Historically, in Western civilization, a good man was one who fulfilled his duties to his family and church and society as an obligation to God or the gods. But in utilitarian hedonism, since there is no objective ideal to be accountable to, a good man is one who is free from all social constraints, one who has no relational obligations to family, church, or society, accountable only to self. And the only obligation that that kind of a good man has is to the state, and the ultimate good is maximizing net happiness or pleasure. So what does that mean for a physician? Well, in the virtue ethic assumption, the duty of a good physician is to protect and save the life and functioning of his or her patient and to relieve pain. But in a utilitarian hedonist system, a patient-controlled health system, the duty of a good physician is to do whatever the patient asks in order to maximize patient-defined goals. And in a state-controlled health system, the duty of a good physician is to act as an agent of the state. I want you to remember that phrase because we're coming back to it. To implement state-defined goals. So both of these 2 worldviews agree that physicians have a conscientious duty to work to save the life and improve the health of sick patients. But they disagree about what conscience, duty, and health mean. So we're going to unpack those 3 terms because those are the terms around which the argument revolves. These terms are defined differently depending on whether you're coming from a virtue ethic or utilitarian hedonist philosophical viewpoint. Let's look first at conscience. Turns out that a lot of medical history was actually a virtue ethic work. So this is Stedman's Medical Dictionary, which has been like the medical dictionary from forever. And they define conscience as an awareness of a moral or ethical aspect to one's conduct, together with the urge to prefer right over wrong. That's conscience. But the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists in 2007 clearly articulates the opposite view. They say healthcare providers occasionally may find that providing indicated, even standard care would present for them a personal moral problem, a conflict of conscience, particularly in the field of reproductive medicine. So for ACOG, for a utilitarian hedonist, if you have a conscience problem, that's your problem. That's not my problem. You go fix your conscience problem. Let's look at the word duty. Very interesting. Turns out law, the whole body of jurisprudence, is based on virtue ethics assumptions, or used to be. Duty. As a technical term of the law, duty signifies a thing that is due. That which is due from one person, what a person owes to another person. And in law, this word is a correlative of right. So the other side of the coin of duty is right. Thus, wherever there exists a right in any person, there is a corresponding duty upon some other person or upon all persons in general. This is the utilitarian hedonist view. And again, I'm quoting from American College of OB-GYN, who so clearly articulates the utilitarian hedonist view of duty. Conscientious refusals that conflict with patient well-being, and we'll unpack well-being in a minute, should be accommodated only if the primary duty to the patient can be fulfilled. So there is an implicit assumption that it is a patient's right to whatever is being requested. And therefore, the physician has a duty to provide the patient with whatever they request because it's their right to request it. Now let's look at health and well-being. Well-being, General Dictionary, a good or satisfactory condition of existence, a state characterized by health, happiness, and prosperity. Well, what's health? The condition of being sound in body, mind, or spirit, free from physical disease or pain, I'd go with that, or a flourishing condition, well-being. So health is well-being and well-being is health. Why do you have to understand that? You have to understand it to read the legal and medical literature to understand what's being said. So I took a more recent medical definition of health. I'm sorry, this is not a more recent one. This is the definition, this is the international definition of health from the World Health Organization, adopted in 1946, and it's not been amended since 1948. That is, a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Well, that leaves most of us unhealthy most of the time. What about more recent ones? You can get this from the medical dictionary online. A relative state in which one is able to function physically, mentally, socially, and spiritually in order to express the full range of one's unique potentialities within the environment in which one is living. In the words of René Dubois, health is primarily a measure of each person's ability to do and become what he wants to become. Well, what happens when what I want to do and become, which is an assumed right, requires someone else to perform an action, i.e. the duty, which they consider to be wrong? So you've got this expansive, utilitarian, hedonic definition of health, which is colliding headlong with the large body of law defending the virtue ethic right of an individual to act according to their conscience. And this happens to be deeply rooted in the very foundation of American society. Well, where are we now? Forbidding the killing of human beings in medicine, consistent with the Hippocratic Oath, became tolerating the killing of human beings in medicine. And how did that happen? I was talking with someone just before the talk. I went to University of Michigan Medical School. Our class was one of the last classes to actually take the Hippocratic Oath. Okay. This tolerating the killing of human beings in medicine came in the guise of fairness and, being nice. We're going to go neutral on these political issues of elective abortion and euthanasia. Well, that basically guts the Hippocratic Oath, and this started in medicine around the 1970s. Now, I picked two example oaths, and it turns out that there's somebody here who's familiar with the Loma Linda Oath because, they have a family member that took it. I'm not picking on these oaths. These oaths are just example oaths, okay? And I'm not going to read them in detail. But I took Cornell's version of the oath, and it turns out that it's vague and passive. There was no objective standard of virtue. There was no prohibition against abortion or euthanasia. There was no prohibition against sex with patients. Well, I then took a Christian oath, Loma Linda's oath, which is better. And there is an objective standard of right and wrong, and it is based on Christian principles. But again, there was no prohibition against abortion or euthanasia. Patient autonomy was paramount, tacitly permitting voluntary euthanasia and even potentially harmful treatments, and puts the doctor's primary responsibility to society in general and not to patients, thus allowing for healthcare rationing and decisions based on the health of society. Now, if any of you are historians and are familiar with what happened in Germany in the 1920s, 30s to the medical profession in Germany, the Hippocratic Oath was substituted there for an oath to the state, so that if you ever want to really dig into this issue, there's a really good book called, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. My goodness, I knew I should have put it on the slide. J. Robert Lifton, The Nazi Doctors. The Nazi Doctors, and he is a psychiatrist from the US who went back to Germany because he said, how could my colleagues, these are my colleagues, how could they have done this? He was Jewish. He went back and he interviewed every survivor, every physician survivor of the Nuremberg trials. And he ended up with some very sobering observations. First of all was the observation that they eliminated the Hippocratic Oath. So they took the primary responsibility from me to you, the primary responsibility to me, to the third party, the state. Now we have insurance. We have other third parties involved in this. And the one who pays the piper picks the tune, guys. So the other thing that J. Robert Lifton noticed, or was his sobering conclusion, is that he said, I wanted these physicians to have horns and a tail. I wanted them to be ugly, repulsive people. And he said, they're really nice people who did really evil things because they thought they were treating the folk, the state, and they forgot their responsibility to the patient. So where are we now? The forbidding of human beings, consistent with the Hippocratic Oath, the forbidding of killing of human beings became tolerating the killing of human beings, that is a neutral position on abortion and euthanasia, which has now changed to demanding medical professional involvement in the killing of human beings, demanding a violation of the Hippocratic Oath. And this all happened around 2000. So I'm going to take a step back to 2007. This is the first Women Deliver Conference in London. And I happened to have the privilege of going there with 6 other pro-life women incognito. They didn't know I was anything but a female OB-GYN who, of course, would be pro-abortion. And so I was able to sit in on some sessions talking about the future. What's the direction? And what they said in London at that time, I went to the conference on making abortion worldwide acceptable. Okay, and they talked about the obstacles to doing that. And what they found was these were 4 obstacles. Number one, healthcare workers' right of conscience. They could work all they wanted to get the laws changed, and those darn doctors wouldn't do abortions. 2, the presence of the Roman Catholic Church and Protestant missionaries in healthcare, and they outlined ways in which they were going to take care of that problem. 3, the use of ultrasound, which, quote, unfortunately turns the mind of the woman to the humanity of her fetus. And number 4, the people themselves don't want it, but we will give it to them anyway by means of the legal system in each country. So that was September 2007. This is November of 2007, and it is the ACOG bulletin that I was quoting from before, but I want to give you a little fuller picture. ACOG, American College of OB-GYNs, the major OB-GYN professional organization, says this: healthcare providers occasionally may find that providing indicated standard care would present for them a personal moral problem, a conflict of conscience, particularly in the field of reproductive medicine. Although a respect for conscience is important, conscientious refusals should be limited if they constitute an imposition of religious or moral beliefs on patients negatively affect a patient's health, which we have talked about, are based on scientific misinformation, or create or reinforce racial or socioeconomic inequalities, which is really kind of ironic, the last one, because Black women have 3 times the abortion rate. So if we want equality, do we increase the abortion rate, triple the abortion rate in the white community, or do we decrease the abortion rate in the Black community? Well, that's never discussed. Conscientious refusals that conflict with patient well-being, remember these are legal terms, should be accommodated only if the primary duty to the patient can be fulfilled. Physicians and other healthcare providers have the duty to refer, that is, you must be complicit in abortion, in a timely manner to other providers if they do not feel that they can, in conscience, provide the standard reproductive services that patients request. I hope that the little background that I gave you before gives you a feeling for what this document is. You have to understand these documents in reproductive health for ACOG are written by the ACOG legal department. And the ACOG legal department is staffed by Center for Reproductive Rights lawyers. So these are not medical documents. These are legal documents meant to bludgeon the pro-life physicians who are OB-GYNs. Providers with moral or religious objections should pick up their practice and relocate it next to somebody who does provide abortions. In an emergency where referral is not possible or might negatively impact a patient's physical or mental health, providers have an obligation to provide medically indicated and requested care. Okay. That is our major medical society, 2007. We screamed. We contacted our colleagues at Catholic Medical Association, CMDA, anybody else who would listen. We all went to the administration at that time. There was a meeting of the President's Council on Bioethics who called ACOG to account. We were all present. And the ACOG representative answered every question by, I have been instructed by legal counsel not to answer that question. I've been instructed by legal counsel not to answer that question. So we all presented, and there was some pushback such that ACOG didn't start to implement this policy. And they said, oh, well, we're going to go back and look at it, which they did in 2016 and reaffirmed it word for word. There's been no change in their policy. Oh, something else I should tell you. It's important to understand. At the same time, in 2008, right after this was published in September 2000, in 2008, our board certifying body, the American Board of OB-GYN, who decides who practices and who doesn't, changed their maintenance of certification requirements to comply with all ACOG ethics statements and principles. Okay, so you can see where this is going. ACOG doesn't have any ability to compel anybody outside of ACOG membership. ABOG, the board, if they pull our board certification, we can't operate in a hospital because hospitals use board certification as a proxy for competence. So this is way back 10 years ago, well, more than 10 years ago now. It's a serious war that we're in. All right, so this is Alta Charo, University of Wisconsin, lawyer. She was on Clinton's Bioethics Advisory Commission. She wrote this very revealing and very scathing critique of conscience called Refusing to Provide Medical Care. All right, so she says, in granting physicians, now I want you to take this physicians and insert pastors or anybody else that gets state approval. In granting physicians a monopoly on the provision of healthcare, they turn the profession into a public utility, obligated to provide service to all who seek it. This was another article in the medical journals entitled Dishonorable Disobedience. Instead of conscientious objection, they have to retitle it. And it was written by 2 activists who aren't even physicians, they're not even lawyers, they're just activists. And they said, conscientious objection should be dealt with like any other failure to perform one's professional duty through enforcement and disciplinary measures. Counteracting institutional conscientious objection, read Catholic hospitals, may require governmental or international intervention. So let's fast forward a little bit, 2020, not so long ago. You couldn't make this stuff up, guys. This is the report of the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief. Talking about gender-based violence and discrimination by private actors with religious motivations. And what do you do about accommodations on the basis of religious belief? One area of particular concern regarding accommodations to national law for religious beliefs is the use of conscientious objection by healthcare providers and institutions unwilling to provide abortions or provide access to contraception on religious grounds. This is the Special Rapporteur on Defense of Religious Freedom who is saying this, not particularly our friend, guys. This is the World Health Organization, 2022, so just a couple years ago. In spite of the human rights obligation to ensure that conscientious objection does not hinder access to quality abortion care, and previous WHO recommendations aimed at ensuring that conscientious objection does not undermine or hinder access to abortion care, conscientious objection continues to operate as a barrier to access to quality abortion care. Those pesky doctors. It is critical that states, i.e., the government, ensure compliance with regulations and design or organize health systems to ensure access and continuity of quality abortion care. If it proves impossible to regulate conscientious objection in a way that respects, protects, and fulfills abortion seekers' rights, conscientious objection in abortion provision may become indefensible. We have no friends in the established medical profession, organizations. This is our friend, the American Board of OB-GYN. This was in 2022. The dissemination of misinformation and disinformation not only involves COVID-19, but is a threat to the access and the ability to provide legal and safe, evidence-based comprehensive reproductive health care, including contraception and abortion. ABOG considers the dissemination of misinformation and disinformation that may threaten the health of patients, remember the definitions of health, who place their trust in its diplomats to be a violation of medical professionalism. You have your board certification yanked for violations of medical professionalism. You have your medical license yanked for violations of medical professionalism. So my organization, the American College of OB-GYN, wrote to ABOG and said, define misinformation. And we sent them a legal document. We had a lawyer write this up. We want your response. What is misinformation? Crickets. Crickets. They won't put it in writing. So this is our response. I had this out there, but anybody who wants this document, just go to the APLOG website, look under committee opinion, look under resources, committee opinions, and this is committee opinion 1. Hippocratic objection to killing human beings in medical practice. And we start with a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. On some positions, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time, maybe now here, when one must take a position which is neither safe nor politic nor popular, but he must take it because conscience tells him it is right. So fundamental to the unique physician-patient relationship is the concept of a fiduciary relationship, a trust that a patient has in her physician to do the best for her. That trust stems from the patient's belief that a physician has taken a professional vow by all that the physician holds sacred to first do her no harm. That vow is the Hippocratic Oath. It is the basis of the doctor-patient relationship. Recent concerted attempts to use punitive legal coercion to force healthcare professionals to participate in or perform the killing of their patients has resulted in a need to clearly again articulate the fundamental tenets of Hippocratic medicine, which explicitly separates medical care from the intentional killing of human beings. So that's APLOG, but I'm going to read something that is beyond eloquent. This is Leon Cass, if any of you remember him. He's a physician from University of Chicago. He served on the first Bioethics Advisory Committee, Presidential Bioethics Advisory Committee. And this is what he has to say. He's Jewish, by the way, but brilliant man. A physician friend who worked for many years in hospice caring for dying patients explained to me most convincingly, only because I knew that I could not and would not kill my patients, was I able to enter most fully and intimately into caring for them as they lay dying. I have to say it because I think what I just said could have been misquoted or misunderstood. The reason I pointed out that he was Jewish is that this is not just, the Hippocratic Oath is not just a Christian creation. The Hippocratic Oath spans Christianity, Judaism, Islam, various other belief systems that go back to sort of a natural law basis. What should a physician be? So here's a brilliant articulation of a defense of what a physician should be. The psychological burden of the license to kill, not to speak of the brutalization of the physician killers, could very well be an intolerably high price to pay for physician-assisted suicide, euthanasia, especially if it also leads to greater remoteness, aloofness, and indifference as defenses against the guilt associated with harming those we care for. That's a natural law argument. He said, defining the limits of medicine, one view is medicine is whatever doctors do, and doctors do whatever doctors can do. Technique and power alone define the art. If we put it this way, we see the need for limits. Technique and power are ethically neutral, usable for both good and ill. The need for finding or setting limits to the use of power is especially important when the power is dangerous. It matters more that we know the proper limits on the use of medical power or military power than, say, the proper limits on the use of a paintbrush or a violin. The wise setting of boundaries is based on discerning the excesses to which that power, unrestrained, is prone. You look and see what's the temptation that a doctor faces, and then you say, here's my limit. Applied to the professions, this principle would establish strict outer limits, indeed inviolable taboos, against those occupational hazards to which each profession is especially prone. Within these outer limits, there's no fixed rules of conduct that apply. Instead, prudence, the wise judgment of the physician on the spot, finds and adopts the best course of action in light of the circumstances. But the outer limits, they're fixed, firm, and non-negotiable. Well, what are those limits for medicine? At least 3 are set forth in the venerable Hippocratic Oath. No breach of confidentiality, no sexual relationships with patients, and no dispensing of deadly drugs. These unqualified, self-imposed restrictions are readily understood in terms of the temptations to which the physician is most vulnerable. Temptations in each case regarding an area of vulnerability and exposure that the practice of medicine requires of patients. Patients necessarily divulge and reveal private and intimate details of their personal lives. Patients necessarily expose their naked bodies to the physician's objectifying gaze and investigating hands. And patients necessarily entrust their very lives to the physician's skill, technique, and judgment. This exposure is, in all cases, one-sided and asymmetric. The doctor doesn't reveal his intimacies, display his nakedness, offer up his embodied life to the patient. The patient is vulnerable and exposed, and the physician is neither, or rather, his own vulnerabilities are not exposed to the patient. Mindful of the meaning of such non-mutual exposure, the physician voluntarily sets limits to his own conduct, pledging not to take advantage of or to violate those patients' intimacies, the sexuality or life itself. The prohibition against killing patients rests also on a narrower ground, related not only to the meaning of the doctor-patient relationship, but also, once again, to the potentially deadly moral neutrality of medical technique. For this reason, it stands as the first promise of self-restraint, sworn to in the Hippocratic Oath as medicine's primary taboo. I will neither give a deadly drug to anybody if asked for it, nor will I make a suggestion to this effect. In forswearing the giving of poison when asked for it, the Hippocratic physician rejects the view that the patient's choice for death can make killing him right. For the physician, at least, human life in living bodies commands respect and reverence by its very nature. As its respectability does not depend on human agreement, and it doesn't depend on patient consent. Revocation of one's consent to live does not deprive one's living body of respectability. Just because a patient wants to die doesn't mean that his or her body doesn't demand respect as a living human being. The deepest ethical principle restraining the physician's power is not autonomy or the freedom of the patient, and neither is it his own compassion or good intention. It is the dignity and mysterious power of human life itself, what we would call the image of God, the imago Dei, and therefore also what the oath calls the purity and holiness of the life and art to which that physician has sworn devotion. A person can choose to be a physician, but he cannot choose what physicianship means. And I'll leave you with that thought because I think that's a really profound something that we need to understand, that there are things that a physician would do which would mean they are no longer a physician. Okay? Physicians do not kill. They do not use ending human life as a therapeutic option. That's what a physician is. So in conclusion, there are two competing philosophical views of what forms the basis of ethical physician conduct. These two views represent two different basic philosophical, not scientific, paradigms about life and its meaning. The current reigning paradigm in medicine is utilitarian hedonist and has been since the 70s. The Hippocratic Oath, in contrast, assumes a virtue ethic paradigm. Which of these will ultimately prevail as the basis of medical ethics for the future is an open question. Thanks.
Does a DNR violate the original Hippocratic Oath?
No, because a DNR is talking about, at this point, when no intervention will change the course, I don't want intervention. So there are times when it's very clear the patient is irrevocably dying. No matter how much I pound on this patient's chest, they're dying. This is the end. And so if the patient doesn't want me to pound on their chest at the end, but would rather die with their family, that is not a violation of the oath. That's just realizing the limits of medicine.
Do you see in the future of work as an OB that it may have to, for pro-life people, would it have to be outside of the hospital system if the your professional organizations, your licensing boards and stuff will hold you to the hedonist viewpoint? Can OBs deliver babies at home? Can they become a boutique kind of offering of services? I'm sure it's a much tougher economic model, but a lot of doctors are going that way now after COVID. And so that's my question.
Well, if you asked me this morning when I came, I would have answered differently than after the last lecture. I think there's lots of signs of hope. We are not dead yet. The American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs is 7,000 and we're growing. So we have held the line, and our board certifying body cannot legally hold us to what they're threatening to hold us to. So the moment they start decertifying any of us, it's going to be a major court battle, and one of us is not going to win. So I think that there's plenty of room right now for good people and people of faith to go into OB-GYN, and I'd encourage you to do that. And I think that when you go into OB-GYN as a medical student or resident, you have to realize you have to know this specialty. You have to have the cognitive knowledge better than your teachers. You have to know the specialty up, down, sideways. So you have to be clearly above reproach, so that if there's any reproach, it's on the basis of ethics and you win, because you cannot be forced out of the profession. As it stands right now with the current laws in the US, you can't be forced out of the profession because you refuse to participate in abortion or in euthanasia, actually. So I'd say not yet. And the other thing you have to realize about OB-GYN is a surgical subspecialty. You just can't do surgery at home. You have to have that team. And so it's a hospital-based profession. So it is a major challenge with the centralization of healthcare reimbursement, and that will get worse. That could get worse after November. It's a major challenge to practice in an ethical way, but we're up for it. And those of us who've signed up as pro-life OB-GYNs, we're ready to take on, the system.
Hello, I'm a doctor of chiropractic, and legally there are some patients I'll be required to refer to medical doctors for a lot of the doctors you talked about and who don't take the Hippocratic Oath or blatantly violate it. I cannot, in good conscience, refer patients to anyone like that. Do you know of any way for me to know who I can refer to?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. I can give you some ways to know. One of the ways is if you go to the American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs website and you click on Find a Physician, you will, and search by your area, you will find the physicians that have been willing to list on this publicly facing list. So if you live in the Midwest, you're good. 98% of our members elect to list on it. If you live on either coast, we have about 150 doctors in New York. I think 1 or 2 list. We have about 200 some doctors in California, 1 or 2 list, because they're terrified. They don't want people to know that they're pro-life. So that's one way. And then, like I said, if you live in the Midwest, you're golden. You can also look and see if the doctor claims on their website some affiliation with Christian Medical Dental Association or Catholic Medical Association or Coptic Medical Association, some other faith-based allegiance. And then after that, you're going to have to call them. Hey, you could do a secret shopper. Or get your secretary to do a secret shopper. I'm looking for an abortion. Will you refer? My mom needs assisted suicide. Will you help her if I'm your doctor? There isn't much other way. Now, one thing I would encourage you guys, you could change the face of medicine. You could tip the scale on this. If every patient would go back to their doctor next time you visit and say, hey, doc, did you take the Hippocratic Oath? What oath did you take? Do you have it up on your wall so I could see it? Were these 7 tenets part of the oath that you took? I mean, you can go to the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine website. The 7 tenets are right there, and just say, was this the oath you took? I guarantee you, if patients would start asking their doctors, did you take the Hippocratic Oath, we would see a revolution in medicine, because it's all about patient-driven and about the money. So not all about the money. That was wrong to say. Patient concerns drive some of the changes in healthcare, and that's one that you could drive very easily just by asking.
So is it part of the training in the current, if I were going to go and become an OB-GYN and go to med school and do my residency, would I be required as part of the training rotation to perform an abortion?
Depends on where you train.
Okay.
push for this was started in '96. APLOG screamed. We went to Congress, and what resulted was the Weldon Amendment and the Coates-Snow Amendment, which says if you force a resident to train, you'll lose federal funding, which of course money speaks, okay? Yeah. So up until about 2019, the way things stood were that every residency training program had to offer the option of abortion training, but it was up to the residents to opt in. In 2019, ABOG flipped and said, every abortion training program has to provide as a core part of OB-GYN training in elective abortion, but a resident can opt out. We have been fighting that because, here I am, first-year resident. I'm going to say to my professor, I don't want to do this. Well, I guarantee you it's going to be a problem. So it's a power struggle. We're fighting it at, on the legal level, but where ABOG stands right now, before Dobbs, where ABOG stood, was that every training program had to require it. Now ABOG is in a very uncomfortable position, by the way, they're based in Texas, of requiring training in a procedure that is illegal in many states. Now, how do you do that? So that's where the legal status of it stands right now because of Dobbs, and certainly in Texas. How can you require that a trainee do something that's illegal? So we'll see where that shakes out. That's still in litigation right now.
When the Hippocratic Oath was required, what entities were doing the requiring?
It was taken at medical schools. When you graduate from the fourth year of medical school, before you hit the wards, so you get your MD, your first step of your MD license when you graduate from medical school. So it was taken at that point.
So it was
then, before you entered the wards, you would have taken or not taken the oath, but it was even voluntary way back in the day in my day.
Okay.
Question will be short. It's related to finding pro-life doctors. So I have perused the APLOG's website a handful of times. Even in a place like Nashville, there's one doctor listed. So do you have any other advice on finding who are those people who are affiliated that are scared? Because I want our moms to know them.
Right. Email me. So what we do, send an email with, we're a pregnancy care center. We're looking for, physicians to refer to. And what we can do is we can send that to all of our scared members and then give it up to them. Make sure you put your contact info. Give it up to them to contact you. It's just we've promised our docs as part of the sign up that we won't divulge it because people will harass them. They'll harass them.
So in one of the very rare and increasingly rare situations in which giving birth would endanger the mother's life, according to the virtue ethics, would the doctor's obligation to his patient kind of overrule the obligation to preserve the life of the child?
Yeah, I am so glad you asked that question. And honestly, guys, I didn't plant him. If you look on the APLOG website, under resources, practice guidelines, practice guideline 10 is concluding pregnancy ethically. And we make a distinction. See, this is where the blinding snow came in after Dobbs. Abortion has about 20 different medical definitions. And the other side is using these, this chameleon effect of what does the word abortion mean? We clearly define abortion. An elective abortion is intentional feticide. And we define it that way because many, many court cases, including the partial birth abortion case before the Supreme Court, the abortionists were asked, look, you've got the baby down to only the head and the vagina. Why don't you just deliver the baby? And they said, because the product we are being paid to produce is a dead baby. Okay? The product of an elective abortion is purposefully a dead baby. Now, in those cases where the mother's life is in danger and you're after viability, you do a C-section, 10 minutes, you're done. Baby's in a place where they can get care, mom's in a place where she can get care. The optimization of care for both. Prior to the ability of the baby to survive outside the womb, which is a shifting number, We recognize that there are some situations where if you don't separate the mom and the baby, they will both die. So you have a choice as a doctor. They both die or one lives. And yes, all OB-GYNs, well, I mean, I can't speak for all OB-GYNs in the world, but I can speak for pro-life OB-GYNs. We recognize, and I've been in that situation, we recognize there are cases where we have to separate the mom and the baby just to make sure that the mom lives. Because if you don't, they both die. And for a physician, this is something that ethicists sometimes don't understand. You got 30 seconds to 60 seconds to make your decision, okay? Inaction is an action. If by your inaction you allow both to die, it is because of your inaction. It's the sins of omission and the sins of commission, okay? So in this case, when you know that you're going to have to separate the mom and the baby, you do it in a way that respects the dignity of that baby, if you at all possibly can. You don't pull them apart piece by piece and shred them and suck their brains out, okay? You deliver that baby intact so that the mom and the dad and the brothers and sisters and grandma and grandma have someone to grieve, because this is a person. And they're in a relationship. They're a grandson or granddaughter. They may be dead, but they are still in that relationship. So when you're planning your delivery, when you're planning the separation, you plan it based on the fact that this is a human being, and we're going to afford that human being all the dignity that we can in a horribly tragic situation. And lo and behold, it turns out that actually produces better healing, sort of a natural law thing, a better healing for the parents and family. But that's not a decision we make lightly. And we don't consider this expansive definition of health, oh, I'll feel bad if I have a baby, to be a life-threatening situation. It has to be something that truly, if you don't act, they will both die. So I hope that helps. But read Concluding Pregnancy Ethically, and it will help you.
I want to step back from the abortion issue itself, just into how the Hippocratic Oath is understood. Do no harm, and yet many decisions have an element of risk. Treat them with penicillin. Oops, 1 out of 100 is allergic and is harmed. How do those questions of risk, how are those understood in light of the Hippocratic Oath?
Well, you do have, there's risk to anything. Risk to driving, there's risk to anything. So there is an issue of informed consent, which in the issue of abortion is often not talked about. And in the issue of euthanasia, you know, if you're dead, that's like the highest risk. So the issue of informed consent does allow some patient autonomy, but there's patient autonomy within those inviolable limits. When you hit the inviolable limits, if you want someone to intentionally kill your baby, go to a veterinarian. Don't come to me as a doctor, because doctors don't use killing human beings as a therapeutic option. It's an absolute limit. Regardless of what she wants, regardless of what the risks are, that's where we draw the line. No, we will not do that, because then I cease to be a physician.
The last question for someone who's been very patient. Thank you.
It's just a short one. In this day and age, more and more, we're not dealing with MDs, we're dealing with PAs or other initials. Are they held to the same standards?
Well, currently no one's held to a standard. That's the problem. You know, MDs aren't held to this standard either. They haven't been since the 70s. So we have, within the pro-life movement, we have PAs, MDs, clinical nurse midwives. We have lots of people who have said, look, I'm in the practice of medicine. I'm not going to use killing human beings as a therapeutic option. It's not going to happen. And there's lots of them. In fact, you guys would be shocked. 2 national surveys have shown that somewhere between 75 and 93% of OB-GYNs do not do abortions. It's not because they don't know how. It's because they won't do it, because that's not what a doctor is. So what you have is a very top-down, you know, medical professional organization like ABOG. Who knows what their fiduciary ties are, or their financial ties are. imposing something that is just antithetical to most OB-GYNs. They just don't do it.
Thank you, Dr. Harrison.